Welcome to Lessons from the Sensei, Law, Business, and Life.
Hey everyone, welcome in to the first episode of Lessons from the Sensei, Law, Business, and Life. I am your host, Mike Leon. Joining me today is veteran Orlando defense attorney Denis Quintana. Success in the courtroom and the boardroom requires more than just knowledge. It takes a master's mindset. Some would say a sensei's mindset. We're going to be diving into and getting to the bottom of what really happens after an arrest in the state of Florida. And who better to tell us all this but the criminal defense attorney, the sensei, Denis. Denis, it's good to see you as always. But before we actually even dive into these criminal defense matters, for the listeners that are meeting you for the first time, can you kind of share a little bit about your background, what led you to focus on criminal defense work?
Absolutely, Mike. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for this opportunity to share and give a little information out there. So I'm Cuban-American. I was born in New Jersey. My parents came from Cuba in 1958, and they came because of a guy named Fidel. And so Fidel came into Cuba January of 59. My parents left Cuba December of 58. They came here because things were a little uncertain in Cuba at the time, and they weren't sure like what was going to happen. But they said, let's get out of Dodge until, things settle. So they came to Miami. Miami in 1958 was not what it is today. And my parents stayed there for a few months. In the summer, which was June, my dad had gotten a job that whole time during January to June. He had started working on Miami Beach. In the summer, the hotels on Miami Beach would close because it was too damn hot. So they didn't actually have air conditioning in Miami until 1959. There was a department store based in Miami called Burdine's. And Burdine's department store was the first commercial department store to have air conditioning, and that didn't happen until 59. So what did my folks do? They went to New Jersey. New Jersey had a lot of factories, and New Jersey was a place where immigrants could go and get a job. So that's what they did. That's where I was born. So I was born to Cuban parents in New Jersey, which New Jersey became the second largest Cuban-American population after Miami. So in ensuing years, many Cubans went from Cuba to Miami. Then many also went from Miami to New Jersey. So I grew up Cuban-American. Having never been to Cuba, I learned a Cuban from my parents. I learned about a Cuba that was very idealized. It was like Shangri-La. The mangoes in Cuba were the sweetest. There were no mosquitoes in Cuba, right? Everything was great. So I grew up with kind of like this fantasy of what Cuba is and was. However, I didn't learn English until I was 5. I was always speaking Spanish with my parents because they spoke Spanish. And my cousins, we moved in a herd. And then I was educated here. I did go to the University of Miami, which I say is the U in Havana, Florida, because of all the Cubans there. I went there to do business. I thought business was the way to go. I went to college in the 80s. And, that's when Wall Street and all these things were kind of booming and busting. And I went to go work for a big corporation. I went and worked for United Aerospace. Did a lot of aircraft stuff, flew around the country, and ultimately decided to go to law school only because I thought law school was better than a business degree. I figured I can get an MBA, but in 1987, a bunch of MBAs were laid off in Wall Street. And then again, in 1989, there was the savings and loans crisis, and there was issues with, working for big Wall Street corporate America. And I said, let me get a law degree. I can be my own boss. And I went to law school. When I went to law school, it was all about international business, international law. Miami was the international city of the 80s. And I started doing trial competitions because I like to talk, right? I'm Cuban. I can't help myself. I'm doing everything I can to keep my hands underneath this desk right now, because otherwise it'd be like a show going on. So during those competitions, I started to do really well. I like to tell stories. I can't shut up. I figured out some of the rules on how to play the game, and I won a bunch of national competitions. So instead of going to work for a big corporation, I went to go work for the state attorney's office, the prosecutor, because prosecutors are the ones that they're in court all the time. right? Prosecutor is the government's representative to prosecute and enforce the laws of justice, the laws of the state of Florida. And I loved it. I had a great time. I learned a lot, mostly from old defense lawyers like me, right? Because if you go in the courtroom and you do something right, great, next case. But if you go and you get your ass handed to you, or you see somebody that does it a hell of a lot better, you learn. And so it was a great opportunity to learn. Eventually, I wound up leaving there because government's great experience, not great money. And I wanted to make more money. And what happened was I got recruited by the then retiring chief of police. So in Orlando, the chief of police for the city of Orlando gets elected after about 25 or 30 years. They become chief, and then they can retire regardless of how old they are, and they can go get a second job, but they can collect their retirement starting then. And their retirement is the average of the last 3 years of their salary. So you imagine you work in a place like that for 25, 30 years, you're at the top, you work for 3 years, and then you retire. Well, the chief was retiring, and we had a case that we had worked on, and he knew me. He knew I couldn't shut up. He knew I was fluent in Spanish, and he was going to work for a corporation that owned a bunch of hospitals in the Caribbean and Southeast America. So they took me with them, and I said, yeah, this is great. You pay me a lot of money and have all these wonderful things, and I'm in. So I went there. I did that. That was great. I did that for about 3.5, 4 years, and I was, going through 1,000-page documents and negotiating all these transactions, but I wasn't in a courtroom, right? I wasn't in a courtroom. And the corporation owned me, right? Like if I'm having to talk with you and a hospital administrator had a question, I couldn't say, hey, Mike, give me a minute. I got to go, right? It was just like, if we're at lunch, I'll just put money on the table and go, right? Because they need you. And that was much different than being a prosecutor. Being a prosecutor, you have a lot of autonomy. You pick your schedule, you pick your fights, you call the order of the cases, and you also have little vignettes of people's lives. Like you're prosecuting something, you're trying to do justice, but you have 300 cases at any time, so you move on to the next, and I missed that. So I quit at the corporation. I gave my notice, and I went back downtown Orlando, and I worked became a partner at the largest criminal defense firm in Central Florida. I worked there for several years. That's where I met my beautiful bride. She was also working at the law firm, and here we are. As we decided to have a serious relationship, I left the firm and I started my own firm, and I have had my own firm now since 2005. So I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Orlando. I've lived in Orlando for 55 years. Orlando's not just Orlando, right? It's Central Florida, so that means Orlando, Kissimmee, Orange County, Osceola County, Seminole County, Volusia County, the whole greater area. And so, back home in Orlando, I've been back home. This is my home for now 3 decades.
Yeah, it's a great story, and I want to ask you to lend on your expertise here of why we're doing this show, which is about the criminal defense system, right? So let's dive into that. So first moment somebody gets put in handcuffs, they get arrested out there, up in Orlando, up in Kissimmee, where my family lives, where we have similar backgrounds. Take people inside from that ride to the station to booking. What does the process kind of look like for them? What can they expect?
The ride there is the most uncomfortable ride, right? Because they've got you in handcuffs. The handcuffs are behind your back. They're not asking, is this comfortable, right? They're not saying, is this convenient? They're presuming that you're a bad person. That's why they've arrested you and you've done something bad. So it's usually a very quiet ride. Now, I will tell you, God forbid you get arrested. If you're in the back of a car, don't say anything, because the cars are recording, right? They have both audio and video. And if a cop doesn't ask you anything, but you start, hey, you jerk, you got this all wrong, blah, 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 let me go, right? That may not be your true character and demeanor. You may be particularly upset at the moment and you're lashing out, and you're not thinking that this may come back to haunt you in the future, right? Because, think 6, 7 months down the road, you're trying to explain to them that you're a normally, calm, deliberate person, you're nonviolent, whatever it is. And they're like, oh yeah, well, here's you, telling the cop to go do something, which is maybe not biologically possible and maybe not pleasant, but it's not you on your best behavior. So the idea there is, look, once you're arrested, just at that point, you're going to go through the process. So that's where I come in. I try to come in even before you're arrested. I try to come in these kind of ways by telling people how to keep yourself, and how to conduct yourself in the event that somebody's accusing you or targeting you and you ultimately do get arrested.
Dennis, let me ask you, how fast do people learn when they're officially being charged with? Like, how fast is that come through?
It's up to the cop, right? The cop can come over and start asking you a bunch of questions and doing stuff, and you don't know what the hell's going on. Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you asking this? You can ask, right? You can say, can I help you? How can I help you? What is it you're asking me? Why are you doing this? Before you answer anything. You don't have to just answer or do whatever they say. But of course, you need to be diplomatic. You don't want to poke the bear, right? When a cop comes over, if they're focusing on you for something, you want to be as cooperative, as accommodating in terms of listening to what they ask. But you also want to be an advocate for yourself, right? You don't want to have diarrhea of the mouth. You don't want to just give them an explanation about, you go, hey, what is this about? How can I help? And then you want to make a decision. Do I want to say anything or not? Because if you're the focus of an investigation, of any kind of criminal investigation, you have a right to shut up. You don't have to say anything, and they may arrest you, but that's not the end. That's the beginning. So, this is all about process, and process starts from the moment that the government, right, the police, have an encounter with you. They stop you for speeding and they say, can I see your license? From that moment, they have stopped you, right? They're not just looking at your license. They're smelling your breath. They're looking inside your car. They're seeing how you're responding. If they think, oh, it's 2:30 in the morning, the clubs are closed, maybe he's coming out of a bar, bloodshot eyes. Maybe they're thinking, should I do a DUI investigation? Or maybe they're looking around the car. Hey, is there any, open container or any, paraphernalia, anything like that. So they're usually not stopping you to say, hey man, you doing all right? Did you watch the game last night? Right. So it's not something that's generally beneficial. And so therefore you have to be smart.
Dennis, let me ask you, the family members that find out about this, right? There's obviously panic that sometimes sets in. Oh my God, this person's been arrested. What are some of the best things you mentioned about shutting up for the person that's actually been arrested? But what are some of the best things the loved ones can do right away? What should they avoid doing?
So the first thing they should do is find out where the person is, right? If they have been arrested, they're probably going to get booked. You just need to know the jail that they're going to. Make sure you know what county. Usually counties have one jail. Some counties have two jails. But you want to know where they're going. And then you immediately want to contact the jail to see if they're going to be eligible for bond. So what that means is when you're arrested, most offenses, you're eligible to pay a bond and get out. Some offenses you're not. So if they arrest me for DUI, I can't just immediately get to the jail, pay money and get out. Because if I'm drunk, I might get back out on the road and drive and hurt somebody. Or if it's domestic violence, right? I beat up my girlfriend because I'm a dirtbag and they arrest me. And then I go to the jail and I want to get out and I come back home and kill her, right? So there are cooling off periods for domestic violence, for DUI. And there's also some cases that you're just not eligible for bond. So let's say I had previously been on probation. And while I was on probation, I got arrested again. So I was on probation for driving on a suspended license. And here I get arrested now for trespassing. Because I'm on probation, they're going to revoke my probation. And if they revoke my probation, which they will, because of a new arrest, that violation of probation, I may not be eligible for a bond. So other than those circumstances, and the last category is just something very heinous, right? First degree murder. I walk up to somebody intentionally and put a gun in their head and kill them, right? I'm just the most heinous things. Well, you're not immediately eligible for a bond, right? You're a danger to the community. But other than that, what a family member can do is find out where they are, how much is the bond, and call a bondsman, right? A bondsman is somebody who will post the bond. They'll charge you a financing charge to do that, but by statute, they're limited to charging 10%. So if you got a $10,000 bond, they charge $1,000. If it's a $500 bond, they don't charge 50. On a $500 bond, the minimum they charge is about $100. But a $5,000 bond, they charge 500. The reason you go through a bondsman is because they post it and you get out, and then you still have money because you're going to need money for a lawyer. So if they have a $5,000 bond and you give your $5,000 to the jail and then you get out and now you don't have a lawyer, you're like, crap, I wish I still had that, other whatever. So what you want to do when anybody's arrested is you just want to get them out, and getting them out on bond is important. That's not the time to start lecturing them. That's not the time to start counseling them or figuring out how to solve their case. You just want to get them out, get them, back in their routine, get them some sleep if they haven't slept, get them some food if they haven't eaten. And then you want to start thinking about getting a lawyer, usually the next day. You don't need a lawyer immediately, but you should, once you're calm, back into your routine, call a lawyer.
Well, Dennis, it funnels into the follow-up beautifully as we kind of put a ball in this episode. So that person that's listening to this right now they know a little bit about you and your background, a little bit about what to expect if they get arrested. Let's hope they don't, right? But for someone who's never dealt with the system before, what's one single thing or one maybe important thing you want them to kind of understand about how the arrest process that you mentioned unfolds in the state of Florida?
Probably the greatest single thing is let the police do what they're going to do, but you don't have to say anything or make it easier for them. And here's what I mean by that, right? If the police want to say, what's your name? Here's my name. But if they want to say, you want to tell me what you did, you just say respectfully, I don't want to say anything until I have my attorney present. But I just want to know what are you doing here? I'm sorry, I don't want to say anything until I have my attorney present. Hey, can I go in your car? No, I'm sorry, I don't want to consent to anything until I have my attorney present. Well, look, I mean, maybe I can just let you go. I'm sorry, I don't want to consent to anything until I have my attorney. Why is that? Because as long as you're speaking, they're investigating, right? And so there's a saying, you can't catch a fish, right, if his mouth isn't open. So if I'm fishing and I have the best bait and the best lure and it's, being pulled on a boat or whatever, as long as the fish is swimming around the bait and doesn't open its mouth, he can't get hooked. And so you're the same way. It doesn't matter why they're investigating you, but it's never for something good or innocuous. And they're usually not just going to let you go. But as long as you're talking, you're potentially saying and doing things that can implicate you. And you're not likely going to talk your way out of anything. So you're better off just not talking. And the reason for that is because it's the government's burden to prove everything. So if they ultimately arrest you because they didn't like you didn't say anything, but they don't have any evidence against you, then you get acquitted. You get the cases don't get prosecuted. And that's ultimately what you want to do. You want to be quiet. You don't want to inordinately keep the cops from doing what they're doing. What I mean by that is, ma'am, I need you to step out of the car. I need you to put your hands behind your back. If you turn around and go, no way, or shove the cop, they're going to arrest you for battery on a law enforcement officer. They're probably going to tase you. It's not going to get better, right? And so you can just go, if they say, hey, I'm going to put your hands behind your back. Okay. Right. So, I mean, just be quiet, let them do what they're going to do. And then we'll fix it.
Best advice to listen to, right? Dennis, thank you so much for the time, the insights, explaining not only your story, but your background in this work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the opportunity.
That wraps up today's episode of Lessons from the Sensei, Law, Business, and Life. A huge thank you, obviously, to Dennis and everything that he does out there in the state of Florida. If you want to connect with Dennis and his team, the law office of Denis Quintana, do me a favor right now. You can call this number, 407-694-5403, schedule a consultation or meet with Dennis and his team. And do me one more favor before you go. Hit like, subscribe, leave a review, comment, share the episode with someone who needs to hear it. I am Mike Leon. We'll see everybody next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.